Mr. and Mrs. Lewis had been residents of the small lakeside town for as long as anyone could remember. They were the kind of couple who drew warm smiles from passers-by, those rare souls who still held hands after 55 years of marriage. Every evening, without fail, they would stroll to the park by the lake and settle on their favorite bench. The bench, though a bit weathered from years of use, remained sturdy and reliable, much like the bond they shared over the years. That bench had quietly observed their lives, witnessing their laughter, tears, and all the hopes and dreams they nurtured together. One spring day, as the park blossomed in hues of green and pink, Mrs. Lewis wasn't feeling well. Her health had been gradually declining over the past few months, and even their cherished evening walks had become increasingly difficult for her. Yet Mr. Lewis, ever the eternal optimist, continued to bring a soft cushion for her spot on the bench each evening, just in case she felt strong enough to accompany him. Then, one bright and sunny afternoon, Mrs. Lewis surprised him. Despite her weakening condition, she insisted on walking to their bench. Slowly, step by step, they made their way through the park, her determination visible in every movement. She leaned heavily on Mr. Lewis for support, but her eyes sparkled with joy when they finally reached their special place. As she settled onto the bench, her breath came in labored gasps, but her smile was radiant. "I just wanted to see our lake again," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the shimmering water before them. Mr. Lewis sat beside her, his heart swelling with love tinged with sadness. He gently took her hand, feeling its familiar warmth. "Do you remember the first time we found this place?" he asked. A fond smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Mrs. Lewis chuckled, her voice light with nostalgia. "How could I forget? We came here for a picnic, and I ended up dropping the entire basket into the lake." She laughed, and he joined in, their laughter ringing out over the water. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden ripples across the lake, they reminisced, sharing stories they had told 100 times before, stories that never seemed to grow old. Mrs. Lewis leaned her head on Mr. Lewis's shoulder, her voice softening as the day's light began to fade. "This bench, this lake, it's more than just a place, isn't it?" she murmured. "It's our life. Every moment we've ever shared is here." Tears welled in Mr. Lewis's eyes as he gazed out at the lake, the sun's final rays turning the water a deep, glowing orange. "As long as this bench stand, so will our memories," he whispered. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close, as if he could somehow stop time from moving forward. That was the last time Mrs. Lewis made it to the bench. After that day, her health declined rapidly, and soon she was gone. Without her, Mr. Lewis felt adrift, his heart heavy with grief. But he knew where he needed to be. Every evening, he continued their tradition, walking alone to the park and sitting on their bench. He brought a small notebook with him, writing down the memories they had shared, their laughter, their stories, every sunset they had watched together. It was his way of keeping their love alive, even though she was no longer there. As the years passed, Mr. Lewis too began to grow frail. The townspeople noticed how the bench, like Mr. Lewis, was showing signs of age. The wood had started to splinter, its once solid frame becoming worn and fragile. Moved by the couple's enduring love story, the people of the town decided to restore the old bench. They sanded down the wood, gave it a fresh coat of paint, and reinforced it to ensure it would last for many more years. They even added a brass plaque that read, "For Mr. and Mrs. Lewis, whose love made time stand still." When Mr. Lewis saw the plaque for the first time, he smiled, his heart swelling with pride and love. He sat down on the newly restored bench, feeling Mrs. Lewis's presence beside him as vividly as ever. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, he knew that their love story was still very much alive. Etched into every sunset, every ripple on the lake, and every creak of the old bench, the bench remained a symbol of a love that had withstood the test of time, one that the townspeople admired and aspired to in their own lives. And every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in a warm, golden glow, the sky seemed to echo the love Mr. and Mrs. Lewis had shared, reminding everyone that some love stories never truly end. Thank you for watching.